The Once and Future Present, Episode 20, Art and Economics. Welcome back to The Once and Future Present, the AP European History podcast from Hammer History Productions. I'm your host, Casey Brooks, and today we're diving into the art world of the 18th century. We'll explore two major movements, Rococo and Neoclassicism, and ask how art reflects not just beauty, but also ideas, values, and even political shifts. First up, as always, is Professor Theo. He helps us make sense of the social and intellectual history behind the brushstrokes.
Glad to be here, Casey. This is one of my favorite topics, art as a mirror for society.
And we're also joined by Dr. Morgan, who always brings the political and economic context to life.
Thanks, Casey. This era shows how art and politics often go hand in hand, sometimes more literally than we expect.
And making a return appearance is our resident art historian, Dr. Romano. She always helps us see more when we look at a painting.
It's always a pleasure, Casey, especially when we get to talk about how art changes as the world around it changes.
So Rococo came first, right? Can we start there? What even is Rococo?
Great place to start. Rococo is an artistic style that emerged in early 18th century France, especially under the reign of Louis XV. Think pastel colors, flowing lines, ornate decoration, and lots of emphasis on lightness, intimacy, and elegance. It's playful and sometimes even flirtatious.
Wait, so what makes it different from Baroque?
Excellent question. Rococo evolves out of Baroque, but where Baroque is grand, dramatic, and intense, Rococo is lighter, softer, more focused on private life and pleasure. It often moves from public and religious spaces into aristocratic salons and drawing rooms.
And that shift from religious grandeur to private intimacy tells us something about the social changes happening. The absolutism of Louis XIV was giving way to a culture shaped by court elites and their leisure.
So Rococo is kind of the art of hanging out with rich friends?
One important context here is the changing economy, especially the rise of the enclosure movement in rural areas. As common land was fenced off and privatized, wealth became increasingly tied to land ownership. This deepened social divisions. Landowners gained even more economic power, while the rural poor lost access to shared farming space. Rococo art reflects this imbalance. It's the art of a wealthy elite enjoying private pleasures, while the lower classes face growing hardship.
I remember you mentioned salons before. What are those exactly?
Salons were intellectual and social gatherings, often hosted by upper-class women, where people discussed literature, science, and philosophy. Art was a central part of that culture, and Rococo paintings would often hang in those very rooms.
A great example is The Swing by Jean-Honoré Fragonard. It captures the playful, flirtatious mood of Rococo. There's a young woman swinging in a lush garden, her shoe flying off, while her admirer hides in the bushes. It's full of motion, softness, and hidden meaning.
So how do we read that painting? What should I be looking for?
Rococo favors lighter, more artificial tones that emphasize fantasy and elegance. Pastel colors like pinks, blues, and creams are common. Renaissance art, by contrast, often used bold, saturated colors, deep reds, rich blues, gleaming golds, to signal the wealth and status of the patron. Baroque art uses color in yet another way, for emotional intensity and political drama. Deep contrasts, strong shadows, and rich hues dominate. Rococo softens all of that into a more playful, luxurious mood, with color helping create that dreamy, escapist feeling.
You said rhythm in a painting. What does that mean?
In Rococo, rhythm often comes from soft, swirling lines and repeated decorative motifs. Think of how your eye moves with the swing and gown in The Swing. By contrast, Baroque rhythm is more forceful and dramatic, with sweeping diagonals and intense contrasts that pull your gaze through the action, like in Caravaggio's works. Renaissance rhythm tends to be more balanced and measured, guiding your eye through harmonious, symmetrical compositions. A perfect example is Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper, where the rhythm of the figures, gestures, and architecture leads your eye toward Christ at the center. Each style uses rhythm differently to create a specific emotional or intellectual effect.
It's worth noting that the content of Rococo paintings wasn't just decorative. They often reinforced the values of elite society: elegance, sensuality, leisure. It was escapist art during a time when many people, especially outside the court, were struggling economically.
So it's beautiful but kind of ignoring reality?
Precisely. And that becomes a point of criticism later, especially as Enlightenment ideas begin to take hold.
Enlightenment thinkers emphasized reason, simplicity, and civic virtue, not flirtation and luxury. And those ideas laid the groundwork for the next movement, Neoclassicism.
Okay, so what is Neoclassicism?
Neoclassicism, as the name suggests, is a new classicism. It looks back to ancient Greek and Roman art for inspiration. Artists used clear lines, symmetrical composition, and moral seriousness. The color palettes are more restrained. Instead of pastels, we get strong contrast in sharply defined forms.
What caused that shift?
A few things. First, archaeology. The excavations of Pompeii and Herculaneum in the mid-1700s brought Roman art and architecture back into the spotlight. Second, Enlightenment philosophy. The belief in rational order and moral virtue made classical art seem like the ideal. And third, the approach of revolution. People wanted art that represented strength, civic duty, and clarity. We should also think about the growing ambitions of European empires. As states like Britain and France expanded overseas, they began to see themselves as heirs to the Roman Empire. Neoclassical art adopted Roman symbols, like togas, columns, laurel wreaths, and idealized heroism, to link modern national identity to the authority and legacy of Rome. It was a way of saying, "We are the new Rome," and to visually communicate power, order, and civilization in both art and architecture.
And we also have to think about who was consuming the art. As revolutionary ideas spread, there was demand for art that educated and elevated citizens, not just entertained elites.
So Rococo was for hanging out, and Neoclassicism is for getting serious?
Exactly. And perhaps no artist embodies that shift better than Jacques-Louis David. Before we look at one of his paintings, let's briefly talk about how sculpture followed these trends. Rococo sculpture, like its painting counterpart, was decorative and playful. Artists like Clodion made small, intimate works featuring mythological scenes, cherubs, and nymphs, meant more for private enjoyment than public awe. In contrast, neoclassical sculpture was all about grandeur and public virtue. Think of Antonio Canova's statue of Napoleon as Mars the Peacemaker, heroic, idealized, and echoing ancient Roman form and purpose. The smooth marble, calm expressions, and balanced proportions reflect the same rational, civic-minded ideals we see in neoclassical painting. And one more thing: gender. Rococo was often supported by elite women. Many patrons of Rococo art were aristocratic women who hosted salons, shaped taste, and commissioned work that reflected themes of intimacy and beauty. Neoclassicism, however, tended to champion masculine ideals like honor, sacrifice, and state power. It was art made for, and often by, a political culture dominated by men and revolution. Now, let's compare neoclassicism with earlier styles. Neoclassicism borrows the balance and proportion of Renaissance art, but adds a sharper moral tone. Where Renaissance painters like Raphael or Michelangelo often celebrated ideal beauty and harmony, neoclassicists used that same clarity to promote civic virtue and patriotic sacrifice. Compared to Baroque, which emphasized emotional drama and movement, think of the theatricality of Rubens or Bernini. Neoclassicism is cooler, more restrained. It uses geometry, clarity, and symbolism to appeal to reason and order, not emotion or spiritual awe. Now, one of the most famous neoclassical works is David's Oath of the Horatii.
What happens in that one?
It shows 3 Roman brothers swearing an oath to fight for their city, held in stark contrast to the women mourning off to the side. It's structured with strong vertical and horizontal lines, muted colors, and a stage-like setting. The figures are muscular. The message is patriotic. It's all about duty over desire.
Okay, so color again. You said Rococo used pastels and Neoclassicism uses more, what?
More contrast, more clarity. Think whites, blacks, reds, and stone-like hues. Saturation, that is how intense a color is lower, but the effect is more dramatic.
Wait, what is saturation?
Saturation refers to how pure or vivid a color appears. Rococo pinks are often highly saturated and soft. Neoclassical reds might be deep and rich, but less vibrant. That difference helps create a different mood.
And those moods tell us a lot about what the art is doing in society. Rococo says, enjoy, while Neoclassicism says, reflect. One is about pleasure, the other about principle.
Are there other examples besides David's Oath of the Horatii?
Absolutely. David's Death of Socrates is another great example, and then across the channel, we have British artist Benjamin West's The Death of General Wolfe.
That's the one you mentioned earlier, right? Can we try reading it together, like we did with The Swing?
Great idea. So let's start with composition. What do you notice first, Casey?
My eye goes straight to the guy in red lying on the ground. That's General Wolfe, right?
Exactly. That's emphasis. West uses a triangular composition to center him. Look at how the other figures lean in, forming lines that all converge on Wolfe.
So it's like the whole painting points to him?
That's right, it's very deliberate. Now look at the colors. Wolfe's red coat stands out against the muted earth tones.
So that's contrast? And also saturation, maybe? His red looks more vivid than everything else.
Excellent, yes. High saturation on the red draws your eye. And notice how the figures around him look almost Roman, even though it's a recent historical event.
Yeah, they look kind of like statues. It doesn't feel like a chaotic battle scene.
That's the neoclassical influence. West stages the scene like a classical martyrdom, serene, noble, organized. Even the dying general is calm and heroic. That sends a message about empire and sacrifice.
So he's not just painting what happened, he's shaping how people remember it.
Precisely. This is visual storytelling with a political purpose. Art like this helps define national identity by borrowing the imagery of ancient Rome to elevate modern power.
So is that emphasis?
Exactly. Emphasis is one of the principles of composition. It tells the viewer where to look first. West uses color and placement to focus our attention on Wolfe as a noble sacrifice.
And it's not just style. The subject choice, an imperial war hero, also tells us about growing nationalism and Britain's self-image.
So artists were part of that political messaging?
Very much so. Just as Rococo paintings reflected elite leisure, neoclassical art shaped public identity and state power.
What about architecture? And why do so many government buildings in the U.S., especially in Washington, D.C., look so Roman? Did that come from this movement too?
Absolutely. Rococo interiors are ornate, with stucco, gold trim, and curved mirrors. Think of Versailles, especially the private rooms. Everything is meant to dazzle the eye and show off elite taste. Neoclassical architecture, by contrast, looks to ancient Rome for inspiration. It emphasizes order, symmetry, and simplicity. Columns, domes, pediments. A perfect example is the Pantheon in Paris, which was originally a church, but during the Revolution was transformed into a secular temple to honor Enlightenment thinkers and revolutionary heroes. Its design and symbolism were meant to reflect rationalism and civic virtue. And yes, this architectural influence crossed the Atlantic. In Washington, D.C., and other capital cities, governments adopted neoclassical styles to connect themselves with the legacy of the Roman Republic. Buildings like the U.S. Capitol, the Supreme Court, and the Lincoln Memorial use marble columns and grand facades to visually project the ideals of law, order, virtue, and enduring democracy.
So even buildings can make a political statement?
Definitely. Architecture reflects the values of the society that builds it.
This is wild. I didn't realize art could say so much without words.
And it's always connected to the bigger picture. Art is shaped by philosophy, economics, politics, and even international events.
So when I look at a painting now, I should ask, what are the colors doing? Where's the emphasis? What mood does the composition create?
Yes, and also who made it, who paid for it, and who was meant to see it.
Well, I definitely see more than I did 30 minutes ago. That's it for this episode of The Once and Future Present. Thanks, Dr. Romano, for helping us see art with new eyes.
My pleasure, Casey. Happy looking.
And remember, history is all around us, even on a canvas.
See you next time, and remember, stay curious, think critically.